name's Grace Lockrobin, and I'm a philosopher working in academia and in the community. And for the last 15 years, which is the whole of my career, I've been a passionate advocate of philosophy in schools. I want to talk to you today about something, and I want to acknowledge what has already been said about the incredible role of philosophy in making children have flourishing childhoods. And I'm extremely sympathetic and in agreement with that, but my talk is about looking towards the future, and actually looking towards the future with hopefulness and with some trepidation, because I see philosophy as having a role in children's fight for their future. Here we go. I don't think you need to travel very far today, not really further than Twitter, to find stories of floods, wildfires, drought, biodiversity loss, species extinction, mass migration, political instability. These are the sort of things we're told await us if we fail to decarbonise. It's not surprising then that looking ahead can be really scary for young people. And I think it's an anxious time for educators as well, because they now face the task of preparing young people to avert, or failing that, to adapt to this new reality. And look, this is a moral challenge for educators as far as I'm concerned, even if it's not made a government priority or an institutional priority. This situation requires educators to equip young people to deal with some complex scientific information. But it also presents young people with profound philosophical questions about what we value, why this matters, and what this means, and what we ought to do about it. I think the status of these questions has diminished significantly in recent years, with the narrowing of the curriculum in particular, and also with the rise of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And this comes at a time when I think their significance has never been greater. As a trained philosopher representing Thinking Space, the educational nonprofit based in the North that I set up over a decade ago, I've had thousands of conversations with young people about what matters to them, almost exclusively in contexts where children face multiple sources of deprivation. Lately, these conversations have taken on just so much more urgency for me. Recent global events lend support to my claim that young people are in need of a philosophical education now more than ever. This year, inspired by the teenage environmental activist Greta Thunberg, tens of thousands of young people all over the world have gone on strike from school to protest against what they see, and so do I, as the inaction of adults in the face of a climate catastrophe. In fact, there are more strikes happening next week. During the strikes in September, I attended a rally in my home city of Sheffield. And there I saw children as young as primary school age addressing the crowd, making powerful and persuasive arguments that those who have the power to act should do something about it. And I was incredibly impressed by these young children's grasp of the science. But I also noticed the way that they cited research and statistics in their talks. And my impression was it was almost that science and their faith in science gave them the authority they needed to address the crowd. Lately, there's been significant public discourse about the importance of respecting the indisputable science around global warming and biodiversity loss. And this is reflected in the response of young people to the crisis, many of whom have been pictured at events like the one I've just described, holding placards that say things like "science, not silence." I wonder whether there's a strange assumption lurking here somewhere. The assumption that discussion around the climate and ecological emergency is fundamentally or only an empirical matter, which can be settled by letting science speak. But this is a mistake, because there are some matters on which science can't speak. It's not really the business of science to problematize its foundational concepts or to evaluate the epistemic status of its methods or its conclusions. Science doesn't judge the significance of its own findings, nor is it its job to make meaning. Arguably, where it does do this stuff, you might think it's philosophy of science. except in physics, where things get a bit more indistinguishable. Okay. Most relevant to what I'm talking about now, science and the climate crisis, is that science can't pronounce on what would be prudent for us to do, or virtuous, or obligatory, or supererogatory. It can't tell us how to live a good and flourishing life. So a decent education in STEM is obviously important, but this alone will not furnish young people with everything they need to fight for their future. Even if there was mass comprehension of and understanding of all the scientific facts around the environment and the environmental disaster that's unfolding right now in front of our eyes, the thorny questions about how to live well in light of these facts are still going to be there. These are questions like, is it ever okay to be selfish? Can children change the world, and should they have to? Does nature have any value besides its value to humans? Is it sometimes rational to abandon hope? Is it sometimes irrational to remain hopeful? What's wrong with extinction? Should today's children have children of their own? What do those alive now owe those unborn? Can we save the planet and treat people fairly at the same time? I wanted to share with you some of the words of children that I've worked with recently, in the hope that you would see that despite the seriousness of this situation, our environmental philosophy sessions, all of our philosophy sessions, aren't designed to burden children with information that's really frightening. In fact, they're designed to embolden children, to be the kind of people who can think through problems no matter how tough. I hope our sessions are, like Angie said, a place where children can flourish as children and where teachers can flourish as teachers. So, in many cases, our philosophy classes recently have taken an oblique view of environmental issues via conversations about topics like value, creativity, and care. What's astonishing about these sessions is how they reveal, regardless of the subject matter actually, who children are, who they could be, what kind of world they would like to live in. One school I've worked at this year is Brudenell Primary School in Leeds, whose head teacher, Jill, is here today. This is a school with a long history of teacher-led philosophy. And at this school, the large majority of pupils are from minority ethnic backgrounds, and many children are at an early stage of speaking English or speak no English when they start school. The proportion of students here at this school who are known to be eligible for free school meals is above average, and the proportion of disabled children and those with special educational needs is also above average. And I tell you this because I want you to appreciate that the philosophical education I'm advocating is for all children. During recent philosophy classes that took place, with some irony, during the severe flooding that affected Yorkshire, children in Year 4 were asked how they would respond when a neighbour cuts down a large tree in his garden. It might be worth stressing that these children don't live in an area of Leeds where you have gardens or large trees next door. The children wrestled first with the idea that anyone would own the tree at all, until one child argued persuasively, look, if someone owns a garden and they bought the seeds and they planted them and they grew a tree and they kept it strong, then yes, that tree would be theirs. But does that entitle them to kill the tree then, if he wants to, we wondered. No, said another child, even if something isn't yours, you can still have to protect it. Later, the class explored whether these same arguments might be made about the entire planet. I'm torn, said one child, trying to disentangle their rights from their responsibilities. Because people can own part of the planet, like a forest, but not the whole thing. But also, yes, we can own the planet because we should look after the planet. And so they went on, allowing us to explore where ideas of ownership met some kind of emerging sense of custodianship. On another day, working with Year 1, I presented the class with a £10 note, some chocolate coins, and some Monopoly money. And I asked them, which has got the most value? The children coalesced around the tenner at first. But a dramatic swing followed in favour of chocolate when one of my philosophy students, who was shadowing, asked which they'd value most if they were allowed to take it home. And as the conversation about whether a sweet in your hand is worth more than the means to buy more sweets later went on, I noticed the neglected Monopoly money, so I asked, what about that? Why might somebody value that? They were stumped. It's just pretend money, said one little boy. And so I asked him, is there nothing valuable about pretending, about playing? Nope, he said with certainty. No, he said, about something that, as a 6-year-old, he spends most of his waking life engaged in. That's just playing. It's just all made up. So children are already imbibing the values of adults. But philosophy gives them the forum to at least reconsider. And in these uncertain times, when many of the values that we hold as adults, especially those linked to unbridled capitalism, have threatened to completely ruin the environment, this space to reconsider is incredibly important. To prepare for tomorrow, children need to weigh complex considerations and to determine which goals ought to be aimed at and which sacrifices made. They must interrogate what we mean by justice across countries, species, economies, and even generations. They must work out how to survive and how to thrive in the face of profound existential threat. And to do this requires the kind of careful thinking that philosophy cultivates. The speakers at the school strikes constructed compelling arguments, I think. They were doing more than simply stating the facts, they were philosophizing. Yet, some of them might not have even realized this, because some of us are so entrenched in the culture of scientism, so say philosophers like Mary Midgley, that we might not recognize philosophy as worthwhile even when we're doing it. If we uncritically assume that STEM is all young people need to face an uncertain future, then we will fail to appreciate philosophy's complementary and crucial educational role right now. Philosophy is concerned with the cultivation of wisdom rather than mere knowledge. In this respect, it's the yin to science's yang. Without the wisdom to know what to do with this hurricane of scientific information, then we are not adequately educating our children, and we're not adequately preparing them to fight for their future. But the thing is, we're not born philosophizing. Much like swimming, or singing, or speaking another language, our potential to philosophize needs to be cultivated. In conversation with a community of diverse voices, perhaps our peers, under the guidance of an attentive teacher, with reference to stimulating and accessible materials, then philosophy can be taught. But if we want to do it well enough to face this uncertain future, philosophy must be taught in schools. There are quite a few people here today who, like me, are doing this already. But we need the support of people with power and influence if we are going to make a difference that's commensurate with the challenges that we now face. If we can't offer young people the security of a safe and sustainable future, let's at least equip them with the curiosity, agility, flexibility, resilience, humility, criticality, creativity, and shared sense of humanity that participating in these kind of philosophical conversations provides.